I will be chairing this evening's meeting. My co-chair, Ms. Haywood, will likely not be able to join us this evening, but she sends her regards and we'll follow up. I will start with the roll call and I will call names in the order in which I see them. Zachary Epps.
Present.
Charles Burdell Williams.
Present.
David Cohen.
Present.
Jennifer Lohman.
Here.
Joel Fishbein.
Here.
Leah Mulhern is here, and that is who I see right now. I don't think I'm missing anyone right at this time. And with that, I will ask to approve the minutes from the April 26th Ed Affairs meeting.
So moved.
Second, Charles Burdell Williams.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. And that takes us to our presentation for the evening. Dr. Smith, I don't know if you're taking over to lead the presentation. We will be hearing from all of our principals from all of our different schools with an update on the school improvement plans. So whenever you are ready, Dr. Smith.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Educational Affairs meeting, Wednesday, May 18th, 2022. Just to note that the date was changed in order to accommodate yesterday's primary elections. Thank you all for being here this evening. Next slide, please. As always, we start with our mission and our vision statement to center us around what we as a district has decided to make sure that we highlight as importance for us tonight. Next slide, please. And tonight's topic area, we are reviewing benchmark data. And just as a reminder from the fall, these are the 4 key bullet points to remember about benchmark assessments. First and foremost, not only is a benchmark assessment an assessment device, it's also most importantly a learning tool. I'm sorry, go back, please. My apologies. And the goal of the benchmarking is to identify students' academic areas of strength and also areas that require improvement. And the primary focus and function of benchmark assessments is to guide future instruction and to support student outcomes on summative assessments. Benchmarks are not and should not be thought as a high stakes exam similar to our PSSA and Keystone exams. However, benchmarking is an ongoing process that helps to provide additional and supportive instructional information to students as well as to teachers to modify their instructions to support students. Also, just as a reminder, with the exception of grades 1 and 2, our other grades use classroom diagnostic tools, also known as CDTs, as our benchmark assessment. Grades 1 and 2 continue to use Wyncote. The benefits of the CDTs is that the system and the formatting, they mirror the high stakes testing that students will eventually take. So it gives them some practice in the format. It is also integrated into the SAS website, which allow our teachers, again, because benchmarks are primarily used for improvement of instructional practices and to make sure that our instruction meets our students' needs. So it is integrated into the SAS system. It is also available to us at no cost. And last but not least, because the exam is diagnostic, it gives the teachers oftentimes more data than they absolutely need, but it allows them to have everything pretty much at their fingertips as they modify their instruction and as they review what students may or may not need. Next slide, please. This screen represents a sample of a CDT report that teachers receive. This particular report mirrors math grade 3 overall. The scale score for all grades and subjects is 200 to 2,000 points. The scale score ranges for red, green, and blue vary by grade and content level. So depending on what grade you're in, depending on when you took the test, fall or spring, and also depending on the content level, whether it's ELA, whether it's science or mathematics, that number does change. The target scale score is always middle of the green. It's the average of the upper and lower green values. The cut score for the Lincoln benchmarks were always changing on the time of the year the benchmark was completed. These cut scores were determined by relating historical benchmark data to actual PSSA and Keystone results for all Lincoln clients, not just Cheltenham. The top represents the end of the course. So anyone scoring in the blue is scoring beyond their grade level. And that's one of the things that I need to point out about the benchmark exams is many times students are presented with information that they have not yet been taught. So again, that's why we're using the CDTs for the older grades, because it is meant to be a diagnostic tool, but it's also meant to be a learning tool. The scores on the CDT do not respond with the color codes on the PSSA or Keystone. So for example, red does not mean below basic and blue does not mean advanced. While the state does not intend that the CDT scores be a predictor of PSSA or Keystone, historical data does suggest that students scoring in green and blue are more likely to pass. Next slide, please. And again, that big sample watermark reminds everyone that this is a sample. It is not representative of any of our grade 3 schools in particular. Next slide, please. And so we are going to begin the portion of the presentation where our school administrators will share their data and also share what they believe is some of the root causes of their data, some of their next steps as a result of the data. And one of the reasons why we're having this presentation here tonight is to show some of the fall to spring comparison. I just want to add a word of caution that again, because the benchmark exams sometimes do test things that are not tested, it is not an apples to apples comparison. There are some standards that are tested more than once from fall to spring and other standards that are only tested in the fall. And there are some standards that are only tested in the spring, but this is our best attempt just to show how students performed in the fall and performed in the spring. And so we use the term comparison very loosely because again, in some instances, we are not comparing the same standards from the fall to the spring. Next slide, please. And now I will turn things over to Mr. Perez, Mr. Nick Perez, our principal of the Cheltenham Elementary School.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nick Perez, principal of Cheltenham Elementary. I'm going to review our data a bit, and later on in the presentation, I'll have an opportunity to discuss a little bit more about what our plans are moving forward. So one thing I do want to focus on is obviously looking at our data for our first grade. If we can go to the next slide. Okay. So in looking at this, obviously your jaw probably would drop like mine did when I first saw this initial data, seeing the amount of students that are in the 4th quartile versus from the fall to now. I do want to just stress though, as Dr. Smith had mentioned, that when you're looking at the Linkit, in order for students, for example, to be in the 1st quartile, okay, they must score in the in Linkit Form C, they must score a 96% or above, okay, in order to be in that quartile. We have, for example, we have students that scored anywhere in that 4th quartile range. We have students that scored as low as 15% all the way up to 85%, okay, that are in that 4th quartile. So we're not looking at like a standard, let's say 65% score and anything above that goes into a proficiency range. So just kind of looking at that, you have to kind of take some of the data with a grain of salt, with the understanding of knowing that point, that you had to score 96 or above to even get into the first quartile, even the second quartile. 89% were students in, let's say, the third quartile. So in looking at this, there's some other data. This is just one point of data that we look at, especially in first kindergarten, first and second grade. We don't use the Linkit in kindergarten. However, we use one of the data points that we do look at are the Scholastic Next Steps guided reading, which gives us an individual student's score for their reading ability, comprehension, in addition to their instructional level, and gives us a guide as to how far they came from the beginning of the school year to the end. So just want to add a couple of pieces there. When we started the school year, we tested all of our students with the Next Step guided reading. We had about 52 students out of our 87 students that were, we started the year with only 52 of them on grade level. Okay, so about 60% of students were not on grade level when they were coming in. So based on our assessments that we just took now, and we do our running records throughout the school year. Our last running record, we only have now 10 students out of those 87 students that have not made 1 year's worth of growth. However, and in those 10 students, those students are either receiving special education services, ELL learners, and also students that are receiving intensive support. Again, this is just one measure that we look at. We do know that many students need to make more than a year's growth in order to catch students up. So we are looking at ways that we can support these students, and we'll go into that further a little bit more when we later in the presentation. If we can go to, then that's our reading grades. In our math, similar, where we kind of flatlined a bit. We are seeing a little bit more students in the third quartile and the fourth quartile. Okay, we expect that is a similar situation as with the reading. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. Our second grade, and both in reading and in math, we are happy with the growth that students are making. We do see that we have more students in our advanced range in the second level, from Form A to Form C. And next slide. And we have reduced students. There's a reduction of students in our lowest quartile, or in our below base, excuse me. Next slide. For our third, and some of the data is going to be similar when we move to the fourth grade as well. As we look deeper in the data, and I mentioned this kind of in the fall, historically, we've looked at our vocabulary acquisition and usage, which has over time still been a deficit for our students. So for example, determining clarity of meaning of unused words and multiple meaning words and phrases, demonstrating understanding of word relationships, etc. So those are all skills that historically students struggle with in our third and fourth grade. So those are areas as well. I think with everything that students have missed with the pandemic, some of this data is still kind of showing through in the gaps that we're seeing. Okay, these are still areas that we're going to be developing and filling in our gaps. Next slide. And as you can see, similar in our math as well in third grade. Our math, we were focusing on numbers and operations, which again, based historically and our data that we received in the fall was still an area that is of a focus for us overall. It does, in numbers and operations, it's also tested heavily on the PSSA as well. Next slide. We did see a slight dip into some students into our below basic range on our CDT. What the CDT did give us, which was helpful in both literacy and math, was the focus areas that we needed to focus on with our students. It was a report that allowed us to see which students we needed to focus on, which students were dipping within that red range or dipping below the aggregate level of students. So we are utilizing that to provide additional supports, targets, target tutoring, in addition to targeting those students for summer enrichment. Next slide. Okay. Similar in our math, our numbers and operations, as in third grade, became an area that we clearly need to focus on moving forward. And again, we're utilizing those focus reports to support our priorities moving forward. And like I said earlier, we'll discuss more about our root causes priorities later on in the presentation.
Mr. Perez, are you done you're done with your portion for now?
Oh yes, I'm done with our
Okay,
data.
I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
I didn't hear Dr. Smith, so I will move us on. Oh,
I'm sorry, Mr.
no,
Perez.
that's okay.
Mr. Perez, you should have one more slide.
Oh, got it.
Thank you.
I thought we were going to wait until the end to do all of the priorities.
No worries.
Okay, no problem. So in our root causes, so as mentioned, we had some literacy gaps that we saw within our first grade level. So you can see there that first grade, we had 83% in the fourth quartile. We had gaps, 43% of our students that were below grade level. You know, we had students needing 1 year of growth and beyond. We attributed a lot of this as far as our root causes to, you know, the availability at times of staff and inconsistencies that we've had in supporting those students that needed the interventions. I think this is an area where we can all discuss that it was a kind of an Achilles heel for all of us at this point in ensuring that we provided consistent interventions to our students. Unfortunately, there were situations that were beyond our control as far as coverages within our buildings, et cetera. So those are things that, you know, hopefully moving forward, we can relieve those issues as far as attendance, things of that nature. Another of the root causes were we had a significant increase in the number of students that needed SEL supports, and that's, you know, both. It's going to be a root cause, I think, in a lot of what we discussed this evening. So a lot of support needed for social emotional learning throughout. So we did have a good amount of students, I think at all grade levels, but significantly in our kindergarten and first grade needing additional social emotional support. Okay. As far as in literacy for our school priorities, I think one of the things that we definitely looked at in order to ensure that the learning of our students is progressing throughout, I think it's important for us to have common assessments. I have this discussion, multiple times with our teachers and also administrators. I even think I had a conversation with Dr. Scriven today about the need for having common assessments that will be helpful to have for our teachers so that we are able to see progression based on things that we currently are teaching. So if we're addressing these 3 standards in the month of October, then there's a common assessment given across the district, and we can then compare apples to apples as far as how students are progressing throughout based on what we're teaching. Also, we are continuing to target additional supports for students based on the data, based on not only just Linked data, but our multiple measuring points that we have in targeting support to students' need, in having those conversations with parents of additional supports that they can look for throughout the summer, and also ways that we can help them throughout our summer programming and tutoring programs. Also, some of the things is to continue our PBIS, which has helped in our SEL initiatives, and again, in hoping to ensure staffing and filling the positions that we had that created a lot of gaps in the various supports that students needed. So in the desired outcomes, moving forward, I guess, if we're going to look at it, we really want to show that our reading level growth continues, that we do have, have students that are gaining at least a 1 year's worth of progress, knowing that we need many students to gain more than 1 year's worth of progress in order to really close that achievement gaps, but also supporting parents through that process through the summer months and assisting them with additional supports that they might need. And again, like I mentioned, as far as the common assessments, and also the trying to decrease that achievement gap. But again, we were kind of handicapped this year a little bit with resources and consistent resources that we needed. Again, no fault of anyone. It was just the nature of where we are through the pandemic. Similar down in math, I think some of the school priorities are similar, but again, targeting those specific areas that we need to target, the numeracy gaps, the various interventions that are needed for students who are below grade level. That's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Dr. Smith, do you want to go through all of them and then do questions, do you think?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. And next up, we have Glenside Elementary with Principal Robinson.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share about Glenside. Before I share about the data and what is salient and root causes, I'd just like to take a moment to thank Dr. Smith for her framing around the benchmark data, which is of learning and its intention for teachers to plan sort of what I need and reorder if needed priorities. I want to just sort of amplify Dr. Smith's point that the story in our benchmark data is incomplete and has an assortment of blind spots. So I just wanted to just share that. So thank you, Dr. Smith. Next slide. If we look at first grade, we'll see that the third benchmark reports 39% proficient in advanced and ELA and 58% proficient in advanced in math. Next slide. Next slide. Second grade, we had 62% proficient in advanced and ELA and 57% in math, proficient in advanced and math. Next slide. Next slide. Third grade, we had 58% proficiency in ELA and 38% proficiency in math. Next slide. Next slide. And fourth grade, 69% proficiency in ELA and 19% proficiency in math. Next slide. Next slide. So the salient data of ELA for as you can see, third and fourth grade, this was their strongest content area. Second grade made up missed instruction nicely. And although this measurement shows the greatest opportunity in first grade, it does not show that over 80% of our first grade scholars made a year or more growth, especially our emergent readers, as evident from their running records, wonders tests, and foundations assessments. Math, first and second grade strongest area. Second grade again made up missed instruction nicely. Third and fourth grade greatest area of opportunity with scholars was their greatest opportunity with scholars having a specific struggle with fractions and geometry, both topics covered after benchmark but before the PSSA. In the area where there was significant growth on the ELA benchmark, I would attribute it to greater fidelity of guided reading with a commitment to 4 days a week for scholars with strategic need or approaching grade level. I would also attribute it to our dynamic reading specialists who met scholars where they were as often as they could in between having to cover classroom due to a lack of subs. And I would also attribute the success to supportive MTSS team who met regularly and supported teachers to create learner-driven and SMART goal interventions. In the areas of opportunity for ELA, I would attribute root cause to time. There was always a lack of opportunities to really sit with the data, to analyze and plan. I would also attribute it to curriculum coherence, scope and sequence. On this formative tool, we may not cover by March all that we would have covered on a benchmark or PSSA that we would by the end of the year. And I will be honest, at Glenside, we are not test driven. We are, as Kuros taught us a few years back in engagement by design, we are evidence informed and learner driven, and that's by intention. I know our district goal is to develop a scope and sequence this year, and this will allow us to have a greater coherence on assessing what has been covered. And I will just underscore what Mr. Perez shared about having the shared assessments that we do across the grade levels. Also attribute winter surge to some of this data. I think what's missing, we're looking at fall and winter. When I look at our data across all three benchmarks, so there's the winter benchmark that we took in December, there was an evidence of increase for most of our grades. Right before we had that winter surge with COVID and students staying home for a month and a lot of staff getting sick, there was, I would argue, probably a lot of regression. And there are areas where there was significant growth on the math benchmark. I would attribute it to our school-wide number sense goal that we met through what we call number sense routines. Last summer, I sent 2 teachers to Penn's Elementary School Math Institute, and they did 2 turnaround trainings for all staff in the fall and the winter. What we found is that the power of number sense routines is that it's not just acclimating students to math, but also at helping them understand the language behind the math and expanding their ability to explain their thinking and others' thinking. And it develops a more conceptual understanding of the math itself. If any of you get a chance, please stop by my kindergarten classrooms, room 7 specifically, and ask a kindergarten to explain subitizing to you. One of my second grade teachers used number sense routines from day 1 and with fidelity. Her results on the third benchmark of 16 children, 11 were advanced, 3 were proficient, and 2 were basic. And please note that several of the scholars that were in advance all had IEPs, that they scored advanced. And the second highest student who scored on the advance in the third benchmark had an IEP for math. And an added bonus is that the children love the number routines. They cannot get enough of it. And this is what we want. We want children to love math, which is half the battle. In the areas of opportunity for math, we would attribute root causes to literacy, specifically around comprehension. So if students struggle with comprehension, it may hinder their ability to understand their action steps. Another barrier is the schedule. We need to revisit, especially in third grade where math instruction took place. There was sort of a break between first part of math and then the second part of math. So that's something that we're going to look into. And finally, just as important as academics this year was our intentional focus on social emotional learning. So despite many hard moments, including the loss of one of our first grade scholars to a rare childhood cancer, teachers, students, and families found ways to pay close attention to wellness. The growth of scholars who struggled emotionally is demonstrated by over 250 scholars recognized in Principal 100 Club. Additionally, we had the successful return of our school dance, diversity festival, Fair of the Bear, grade level family engagement nights, and hybrid PTO meetings. One thing that I just want to note this year is that we moved as one in the building, and I could not be more proud of my school community. Root cause of our success for social emotional learning continues in our PBIS action plan. We also had a counselor and art teacher cross-curricular initiative to promote an environment of respect and rapport for all students stemming from content and artistic exploration focused around the topics of diversity and equity. We also had a lot of empathy. We took an inquiry stance on trauma and training our brains. And I'd like to thank the SEEK workshop on Monday, who gave me the language for this, but training our brains to give the same understanding to indivisible disabilities that we do to the visible ones. So for our scholars where there was an increase in emotional just crisis mode this year, helping use our brains to kind of think about that as an invisible disability really helped us cope this year. Also, culture proficiency, structure, strategy, and mindset. So given this year did not pan out to be what we thought it would be, my priorities and outcomes remain the same from the fall as we look into the next fall season. I'd like to make sure that teachers are collaborating and communicating across their disciplines. So classroom interventionists and specialists are communicating. I'd like to continue to develop teachers as content experts. For when that what I need time, a double dose of instruction and intervention for tier 2 and tier 3 scholars. We'll continue to have a transparent data wall that is viewed vertically and horizontally to inform our focus areas. And our MTSS team will continue to prioritize safety nets, PBIS, culture proficiency, mindfulness, and flexibility on my part in terms of leadership. The outcomes also remain the same. We want 100% of K-4 scholars to demonstrate growth towards mastery of grade level ELA and math content as measured by their performance on foundations, next step guided reading, Wyncote, CDT, and PSSA by June of 2023. One thing I just want to emphasize is the story of Kellen, and I'm using a pseudonym. Kellen, who started first grade as a very emergent reader, we sent him to kindergarten foundations where he quickly developed phonemic awareness and moved through the K reading levels so much that by January-ish, he returned to first grade literacy where he is now quickly moving through those levels that we anticipate by June, he will have grown 2 grade levels by the end of this year. This is what happens when good classroom instruction is married to great intervention. Kellen, however, you won't see that story because in his benchmark, he scores below basic, but you won't see that he made this 2 years growth. Another ongoing outcome is 100% of our scholars and teachers will demonstrate an increased sense of well-being, connection, and self-efficacy as measured on pre and post surveys. And if I may, an outcome that I hope that the board and central office have is the well-being of principals. I can only speak from a K-4 lens, but as I shared in the fall, we need help. I don't know what years ago created the conditions of our current human capacity structure, but at the K-4 level, we encounter the same needs as the other divisions and have the same responsibilities as the other divisions. But we are just one person in schools that can reach an enrollment of over 450 students. At one point, I think I had 477. It is too much. When we removed the culture and climate administrator, the expectations did not change. We need help. We need another administrator, another counselor, and more support staff for lunch and recess. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Robinson. We are now moving on to our next K-4 elementary school, Principal Lytle at Myers Elementary.
Good evening, everyone. I am very excited to share with you this evening. I will echo the sentiments of many of my colleagues and supervisors as has been captured. Yes, we all have had challenges this school year, so have we at Myers. I'm sure that we have all framed them in a manner in which you all hopefully are able to grasp them and parallel that with the efforts that we have put in place in order to meet the needs of our students. With that being said, I am just elated and I'm so proud before I go to any of the data slides of what my students and staff are doing at Myers. We have focused on growth. Growth can happen in any increment. And we say that this is growth and this is growth at Myers. And before we can get to that growth, we need to just have a common language, a common theme. And I'm so proud of the students, all of the students, whether they be Title I, receiving special education supports, whether they be ELL students or students that are in enrichment classes or gifted, just in the mindset that we have taken on as a Myers community as it relates to taking ownership of our learning and using data to drive our instruction. As Dr. Smith stated, these benchmark tools are a measure of how much, they are a measure of how teachers can drive their instruction. So with that, I would like to progress to our first grade. First slide, please. First grade is where we struggled. If you'll notice here, one of the things that I like to see as I look at data, and it's something that I like to do, is to look at it and to help others examine data to drive their instruction. And it's easy for us to look at green, yellow, orange, and red bar graphs. But when we take a look at a student's performance as relates to a standard, and then we break that down to look at the skills that are embedded in that standard, and then we take that and look at how can we help teach those prerequisite skills and strategies to accomplish that skill to give them access to the standard. That takes these red lines, these yellow and these green lines, and gives them a greater context than just a number that is on a page. Nonetheless, as Ms. Robinson said, we do not teach the test, but we have the privilege of teaching what is on the test. And we use this metric as a tool to guide us in what we need to teach kids, not just throwing out blanket instruction for all. As you can see by the data here for first grade, we noted that and I'll say this, I like to see, as I look at our assessment data, if you look at the left side of your screen, you'll notice that the stairs are going up. And we like to see the stairs going down on the other side. That's one way that I like to simplify as we start to have this conversation about data. We're not starting at Myers for our children. And what that means is the students may have struggled when they came in the school year, and those green areas on the left side of the screen might be low. And we might see a large number of students in that fourth quartile. But as we progress throughout the year, we would like to see the green on the right side of the screen very high, if possible, and the stairs to go down. Now, considering all things being equal, a restatement that everything that the assessment looks for kids to be able to do has not been taught yet. So all of the caveats and all of the intricacies and all of the details that go along with this are very, very relevant, especially in the context of the pandemic. We struggled in first grade. And what you'll notice here is that we have about 40% of our students in the fourth quartile. And we knew that coming off of the pandemic and what kindergarten looked like, that we were going to have to be very intentional in our first grade instruction as it related to putting in very focused and intensive work as it related to meeting the needs of those students. I am proud of the growth that they are making. I think that we've been able to identify the root causes and problems from areas of growth that we'll discuss later as it relates to first grade literacy. And I think that our plan for moving forward will allow first grade to mirror some of the other results that we've had in other grades following our instructional plan and areas of focus instructionally as a school. Next slide, please. You'll notice here that we have a little bit of a stairway here, and we have about 31% of our students scoring in the first quartile in math in first grade. And we saw that 35% on Lincoln Form A were in that fourth quartile. And we were able to implement our instructional focus areas and our instructional plan as we outlined at the beginning of the year, using that salient data and looking at those root causes to increase our first quartile performers to 51%. I want to reiterate that the sky is the limit for all of the kids in first grade. They had a very unusual and unorthodox kindergarten, and that I am so excited and so optimistic about how they will perform in second grade and the remainder of this school year, being that the Wyncote assessment was given in March, and we still have learning that's taking place. But with this graph, you'll see that we're able to utilize our differentiated instruction, the structuring of our schedule, to focus on small group instruction and to move students based upon what they need. The key has been giving the kids what they need. If we can move to the next slide. We can see that stairway again here in second grade as we look at ELA. At the beginning of the school year on the left side, we had students scoring advanced and proficient at about a 40% percentage. And that just gave us direction. Remember, it's not about achievement, it is about growth. And it is about using these tools as a barometer and as an instrument to guide instruction. The more tools we have to guide and find data about where students are, the better for those who are familiar with disaggregating data. But as Dr. Smith stated, it can sometimes be a detractor as well. The Wyncote assessment does allow us that data in conjunction with things like IXL, to allow us to pinpoint and focus our instruction. And we were able to increase the number of students from approximately 40% to approximately 70% in second grade as it relates to ELA. And I'm very optimistic about the foundational skills for third grade that we have been integrating over the last 3 months, with an emphasis in second grade on text-dependent analysis writing and writer's workshop, which will translate into our third grade year. Next slide, please. You see the stairway again here. Students came to us and we were able to meet them where they are. As my colleague said, we are all rolling up our sleeves and working the very best that we can to give every student what they need. Kudos to every administrator, every teacher, every parent, every student for giving their very best effort and growing. We are having a growth on both breakfasts. And I don't care whether you grew 1 point or 1,000 points. All of the students in our school in third and fourth grade will be attending that growth breakfast. And I think it's that mindset where kids are setting goals that allows us to focus our instruction, for all of us to take ownership, and for us to celebrate students for moving from where they were to where they are without focusing on mastery. It's going to take time. And as we think about instruction vertically instead of horizontally, meaning a continuum from kindergarten through 12th grade, as opposed to just a 1 grades level performance, we're going to see that growth at Myers, at Elkins Park, Glenside, at all of our schools district-wide. Next slide, please. As you look here, we were a little stagnant as it relates to the performance of our third graders on the CDT from the fall to the spring. And I use the word stagnant very minutely, because as we know, what students are expected to know and perform increases as the school year progresses. But you will see we had a little bit of a shift here. In the beginning of the school year, on the first CDT assessment for ELA for third grade on the CDT, we had approximately 70% of our students scoring advanced or proficient. And if you look over, while that advanced dropped, we'll see that we're still in that silo of 70% as it relates to for proficient and advanced. With that being said, I'm confident that our teachers are able to utilize data in a uniform and school-wide manner that is becoming consistent from classroom to classroom, that will empower every teacher to know what to teach to what students and how to teach them to each student in order to make sure that they are able to master those standards as they progress from grade to grade. Next slide, please. And here you can see our third grade math. Third grade math has been an area of opportunity for us at Myers. And you can see that we struggled in the beginning of the year with about 54% of our students scoring proficient or advanced. We stayed almost stagnant there, but we did see a little bit of a regression as related to students scoring basic, with about 13%, though our numbers for below basic did go down. And again, these percentages are relative to the number of students that have been tested. If we have 58 students and we're talking 20%, we're talking about 10 to 12 students, so forth and so on. So when we look at this data, based upon the amount of instruction that has been delivered, based upon what these percentages mean, I echo the sentiments of my fellow administrators and Dr. Smith as it relates to the relevance of this data, which is very relevant. But what it is relevant to be used for is very much paramount, and that is to drive instruction. Next slide, please. Our fourth grade, I'm very proud of them as well. You can see that we're, and in the fall, we had about 64% of our students scoring proficient or advanced and 35% at that basic. And we were able to have a slight shift. We still have room to grow as we do in each and every grade, but we do see that stairway there, which means that we're growing in the right direction. And I cannot use that word grow enough. If you come to our school and you walk through the door, if you're with me, someone's going to run up to you and tell you that they passed the test, or that they grew 2 points, or that they're reading on this reading level, or that they're on this level on a computer. And I can't ask for anything more from our kids and our teachers, that for teachers to take ownership of students individually and to encourage them, as well as for students to take ownership of their learning as well and to be proud of their successes. We see that taking place in fourth grade as evidenced by the data. Next slide, please. And here we see again, we have room to grow. I would say that our numbers remained pretty much stagnant, although there's some areas of highlight here where we've increased advanced by a couple of percentage points and increased our proficient by 10 or 12 percentage points. I'm very proud of our students for that. But as we look at the data and we learn to use it to drive instruction from classroom to classroom, using a systematic approach and hold each other accountable for teaching in a manner that is relevant, that is engaging, that is encouraging, from classroom to classroom, so that everyone that touches that student, whether it be the classroom teacher, the special education teacher, the ELL teacher, we're all taking ownership and we're all knowledgeable about what that student needs to be successful. Next slide, please. We like to simplify it at Myers. First of all, I want to take this moment to do a brief caveat and commercial and say congratulations to all of my outstanding students and staff for being recognized for positive behavior intervention supports for the second year in a row at the state level. And you might ask, what does that have to do with instruction? It has everything to do with instruction, because there is no line between climate and academics. They are one and the same. And as we change the culture of our school, and we change the mindset of our students and our staff about our kids and about what teaching looks like, we're going to see positive outcomes. So I'm very proud of that state recognition for the second year in a row. And it definitely ties to our instructional gains as it relates to making sure that all students are reading on level, performing above standard on the state standardized assessments, and decreasing our Swiss referrals, especially for students of color, and closing the achievement gap. Our salient data, as I just showed you, our students in second through fourth grade are showing some increases in some areas, but we show areas that we need to grow on. Grades 2 through 4 show a very low percentage of the student. Grades 2 through 4 show very low numbers of students scoring in the below basic or fourth quartile. However, we still have room to grow, and we know which way to go. Especially as it relates to first grade. Some of our plans for next year, which I'll talk about briefly, do have specificity as it relates to addressing those areas of needed growth in first grade. And while it relates to math, we are seeing growth. We're seeing that the formula works. We are seeing that if we are student-centered in our instruction, providing them opportunities to engage with the content in multiple ways, if we are data-driven and utilize small group instruction on a consistent basis, and if we are knowledgeable about the standards and plan backwards from them, that is the base recipe that we are finding has been successful, that has been usable, that has been embraced, and that has become commonplace at Myers. Some of the root causes of some of our areas of struggle have already been echoed by many of my colleagues, and I would like to echo many of the things that they said. When we talk about the social emotional impact of the pandemic, I think many of us thought that the kids would come to school and that in that first week, 2 weeks, it would just be pandemonium. We are just now seeing the impacts for some students as it relates to socialization, needs, sharing feelings, interaction with their peers, being able to engage for extended periods of time, demonstration of behaviors that disrupt the learning environment. And while we have so many great things, we can't ignore the need for assistance in that area, not just for us as administrators and teachers, but all for the kids. And those resources would be welcomed at Myers as well. Also, it's worth noting that the pandemic is still occurring. And we are still in the midst of a pandemic. And while we see low numbers with our students, it has affected staffing. Staffing has been a concern as it relates to being able to consistently implement instruction in a manner that is rigorous, engaging from classroom to classroom throughout the year. I think one of the things I'm most excited about is the opportunities that I have at Myers to speak to teachers on a very authentic and transparent level regarding student data. With data as our foundation, we're able to have transparent and rooted conversations about what we're doing, what's working, and what direction we need to go. So you'll see here as one of our root causes, continued professional development and feedback and coaching for teachers around best practices and how to disaggregate and use data in order to make sure each student gets what they need. As we move forward and talk about our school priorities, I cannot stress enough how powerful PBIS is as it relates to shaping the hearts and the minds of the students. We all know that students care how much you care before they care how much you know. That is just not true for kids. It's true for whatever job you have, whatever organization you're a part of. That sense of community and belonging permeates through them and translates to what they're able to do, what expectations they think they can meet, and how they feel about themselves. So thank you to the Office of Student Services and Ms. Keene. Thank you to everyone at Central Office who has lent whatever resources that they have, whether it be time, whether it be expertise, whether it be advice, as it relates to us dealing with some pretty significant behaviors that have presented themselves with students and helping us in a manner that we can continue on. PBIS is just the ground level of interventions to address all students' needs. And as we talk about the need for social emotional healing, supports, and resources, we're talking about those tier 2 and those tier 3 students that could benefit from such resources. And then another school priority is to be present and in those classrooms and making sure that we're able to support teachers with what it is they need. I think that our teachers at Myers have reached a point where they are, of course, I think they're very open, but they're semi-open to having a dialogue that centers around data. Data is often the thing that no one wants to talk about, because while we can look at it in a constructive way and use it to guide us, in the past and in other places, it's been used to vilify teachers. But once we get past that obstacle, we're able to utilize it in a fashion in which it's a tool, and we're able to have authentic conversations with the children at the center, and that's what moves the kids forward. So our desired outcomes are to increase the number of students scoring proficient advance on the ELA and Math CDT in grades 3 and 4. We want to make sure that all students are reading on grade level prior to leaving second grade. In third grade, they are reading to learn, and in K1 and 2, we like to say they're learning to read. As it relates to something that Ms. Robinson said, as she talked about number sense routines, we echo that sentiment that we want students to learn the conceptualization of math rather than just the proceduralization of math. We think that as we start at an early age with students understanding the why of math, that it will help them as they progress all the way from K through 12 with the what of math and the how of math. And things like number sense routines help students, especially in math, which is an area of struggle, to grasp concepts at a level that extends beyond steps and procedures. Next, we want to continue to decrease the achievement gap between our African American students and their peers. When you look at our data and you see some of those increases that are based upon the excellent instruction that's delivered by our teachers, our African American students are in that data. Our special education students are in that data. Our Title I students are in that data. When the data moves as a school, it moves for everyone. And we want to continue the implementation of PBIS. One of the goals for our implementation of PBIS is to increase the input of parents. And we're working very closely with our PTO to give them an even greater voice as it relates to what PBIS looks like in our school and how it can permeate beyond the walls of our school and become and have a bridge to the home environment. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Principal Lytle. Our next presentation will be by Dr. Clark, our principal of Wyncote Elementary School.
Good evening, everybody. And so it's a pleasure to join you this evening and share with you the happenings and the data at Wyncote Elementary. And so if we can go to the first slide, please. And so our Wyncote students, I would say, have been very resilient. As my colleagues have mentioned, our year has been very difficult. I would say with inconsistent teacher coverages, with illnesses, with stress, anxiety, and other factors. We continue to work through it, but it has been one of the most difficult that I can ever remember. But we do continue to use our data to target teacher instruction, and we do celebrate our milestones and continue to work diligently to address changes in our data. And so if you look at this first slide of our first grade reading data, our first graders for the fall assessment, where 53% of them were in the advanced or were in the first or second quartile range, where by the time we went to the spring assessment, that had gone down to 44% of our first graders. 38% of our first graders were in that in those top two quartiles, which was a drop of about 15%. Again, as was mentioned earlier, there are some cut score changes as our tests move from, from fall, winter to spring. And so, understanding that there are areas in the assessments that our students are tested on that they may not have learned yet. And so we continue to look at what these areas are. We continue to support students where their needs are. We actually had skill builders and some other interventions where we looked at student data and we made strides to support them in the areas of need. If you can go to the next slide. And looking at our mathematics, our students started off the year in if you look at the first and second quartile scores, about 48% were in those top two quartiles. And by the spring assessment, it had gone down to about 44%. So not a significant decrease, but we did notice growth by 13% in the first quartile. And so we, made note of that. However, again, when making note of how students did in the fall to the spring, we're not making an equal comparison where, again, there is new concepts that students are being introduced to, and there are often there are changes in the cut scores that make the data as we see it not, I don't want to say not as relevant, but makes the data as we see it not as equal. It's not looking at the same thing for students from one semester to the next. Can we go to the next slide? So we're looking at second grade. So our second grade in reading, if we looked at our fall scores, so the advanced and proficient students in the fall, we were at 68%. And then when we moved to the spring, that number has gone to 75% who are in the advanced or proficient ranges. And so, which that signifies a 7% growth from the fall to the spring benchmark. Next slide, please. In math, our students they began the year and their advanced and proficient scores were in the 36%. And by the spring benchmark, the growth had continued, where advanced and proficient scores are now 56%, indicating a growth rate of 20% from the fall to the spring of students who scored in advanced or proficient ranges. Next slide, please. For our third grade reading, for our students scoring in the advanced and proficient ranges, we had 60% when during the fall assessment. We had 57%, those scores had gone to by the spring assessment. What's noted actually is the growth in the proficiency rates of our third grade for our reading in the spring. Those proficiency rates increased by 20%. And so we did lose some ground in our advanced, but we have increased, we lost ground in advanced and basic, but those areas were taken up with our proficiency scores. Next slide, please. So our fourth grade, I'm sorry, our third grade math. Third grade math, at the start of the year, we were at a 57% of our students, 57% were scores were in the advanced or proficient range. And by the spring assessment, that had decreased to 43%. So a decrease of 14%. And again, those are areas that we continue to look at and focus on, as third grade is a primary focus for mathematics in our school. Next slide, please. Our fourth grade, our reading scores in the advanced and proficient range started off the year at 74%. It has now gone to 61%. However, other assessments that we've had within our school indicates that our students are having more of a struggle in the area of comprehension. We continue to provide additional emphasis with text-dependent analysis and reviewing those levels of skills to really get students able to talk about what they've read, and using inferences to help them further respond to text. Next slide, please. In math, also an area of emphasis, in the start of the year, fourth grade math was at 41% of the students were in the advanced proficient range. That has dropped to 26%. And also another area of focus for us, especially in math for third and fourth grade, are on basic skills as well as word problems. Next slide, please. So when looking at our salient data, our first grade advanced proficient scores decreased by 15%, math scores increased by 12%. Second grade advanced and proficient math scores increased from fall to spring by 7%. Math scores increased also, reading scores increased by 7%, and math scores increased by 20%. Third grade reading scores decreased in advanced and basic, while proficiency levels increased by 20%. Math scores decreased in advanced by 17%, as proficient scores increased by 3%. Other areas had minimal increases. In our fourth grade, reading decreases in advanced proficient by 13%, and math decreased by 15%. Some of the areas I feel are root causes are some lack of alignment in the curriculum and assessments. I think one of my colleagues mentioned before how we do need some alignment with our assessments, so that there is an expectation from teacher to teacher, grade to grade, of what students are assessed on and how they're assessed. So we do need some work with that area, because with not having the same assessments, there's some inconsistency in the implementation of how our resources are utilized. There are more professional growth opportunities, I believe, are needed for staff in using their resources with fidelity. I would say that there also needs to be additional professional growth opportunities for principals as well. You know, in a K-4 building, I'm the only instructional leader. And, you know, I believe, I'm speaking for myself, but, you know, we also need to get our buckets filled and keep abreast of what's happening as far as the curriculum and resources that are available to all of our teaching staff. And so that would be appreciated. I would also say that there are some social emotional concerns regarding student grit and academic stamina. We've talked about how this pandemic has been a game changer, and it has been a very different environment that we've witnessed as it relates to students and their ability to attend. We have a lot more meltdowns now than we've had that I can remember having in any recent memory of students who are very emotionally fragile. We as a staff have tried to be very patient. I really commend my counselors and, you know, all of the members of my crisis team, because we've had to do things differently because the students are different in some way. I think all of us are a little different. And so I would say that it's important that we use the data to inform our instruction, but we also place emphasis and work with our social emotional learning supports for students as well as staff. I think the staff have gone through an enormous trauma, and you know, I find myself not only counseling and supporting students and families, but also supporting and counseling staff members. We can't forget our soldiers on the front line, and we should, you know, continue to do everything we can to make sure that the wellness of everyone is taken care of. We're also increasing our PBIS initiatives, not only for students, but we're finding ways that we can actually support our staff members as it relates to positive behavior, intervention and support. It's something that, you know, we've been talking about for a number of years. We actually have the parent components, we have the student components, we have the reward systems, but now it's, you know, for teacher buy-in, we need to stroke our teachers a little bit and make them feel, you know, really an integral part of the process and the success of what we do. So that's something that's also ongoing. And a pet project that we've also started is having students really learn in alternative settings. Again, with mask wearing, there's been a level of anxiety that I believe we have in the buildings. And so we are starting a outdoor classroom initiative that hopefully we'll be working on this Saturday at our landscaping day. So our priorities, we will continue to focus on multi-step problems, basic skills, comparing unlike fractions, adding and subtraction like fractions, operating algebraic thinking with the use of instructional walkthroughs, looking deeper, using Envision programs with fidelity, having our data meetings, providing teacher feedback and focused team meeting review. Our school-wide focuses for reading will involve students understanding what they read and respond to written text. This skill forms the mastery of TDAs that students need to know how to master by 4th grade. And our overall desired outcome is to provide that having effective instruction will result in school-wide achievement increases on local and state assessments. that school leadership and instructional staff will regularly engage in instructional meetings with grade level content area teams and central office support when needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. And our next principal in school, Mr. Wallace for Elkins Park.
Good evening, everyone. So I am Brian Wallace, the proud principal of Elkins Park. As we go into our first slide, we want to look at our data. One of the things that was mentioned before is that our data pretty much was pretty stable, except for in the area of growth. But there is some positive things to look at as our data, and some positive news for the 4 elementary school students. I mean, 4 elementary school principals that I'm going to give them as well that will make them feel really good. And as I also looked a little bit at Mr. Metcalf's data, it made me feel a little bit better about the work that we're doing at Elkins Park. Now, this data that was given, we didn't see the great amount of growth that I was expected, but stabilizing, especially in the area of ELA and looking at the area where we need growth. Now, in the 5th and 6th grade, we realized that students begin to really have to work harder to master those math concepts. And they develop whether or not they can comprehend. Reading passages become a lot longer. They have to do text-dependent analysis. They have to be able to report what they are able to do. And as you see in our 5th grade, it pretty much maintained where we were. Our below basic went up a little bit, but we were able to really sort of maintain an advanced and proficient and our basic as well. So 5th grade is doing a great job as far as ELA, and I'll break down some of the proud points about that a little later. As we go to 5th grade math, it is an area of concern as we go next. However, math, as you'll see, they start out a little bit with a little bit more easy standards in the beginning of September. As we know, when they get to 5th grade towards the end, they're introduced to fractions, decimals, and percent. They have to be able to even get introduced a little bit to ratios, a little bit of introduction of geometry. So the skills get a little bit more difficult. And so 5th grade math is an area that we definitely want to work on. But we did see some growth, and as far as we did see some things that were stable as well. Then we go to 6th grade. 6th grade ELA is an area that I'm really proud of. Pretty much maintain, of course, the same standards, and I'll talk about why that's so important in 6th grade. In 6th grade, a lot more challenging material that they're reading. They have to digest a little bit more, comprehend a little bit more, being able to do some inferencing, as well as we're going to talk about a little bit in the PSSA, which is going to be measured a little bit different from math and ELL because they have to write open-ended responses and do text-dependent analysis for ELA as well. And as we go to math, math is again the area of that I'm a little bit concerned of as far as as far as 6th grade. But however, there is some good things to talk about with math and some areas of growth. So we only have 2 grades. We have 2 subjects that we're focusing on. It's a positive story for ELA and a concern for math. We, as you could go to the next slide, and we go to our slide. Next slide, here we go. So we focus all of our attention on math. So we'll talk about that, and it's also our area that we struggle with a little bit at Elkins Park. However, the good news is if we compare what we did on the PSSA, we're predicted to do at least 10 points or more higher on the PSSA test than we did last year. And one of the reasons why is even though we need to reduce the number of students that are in below basic, we only have 1/3 of our entire school that's below basic. So we have more kids this year who are in advanced, as you see, 13%, and we have more kids than we have in proficient. If you look at 6th grade, we see 33% of our students are going to be proficient or advanced for mathematics, and we are excited about that. As you see in 5th grade, it's the same amount around the same number. Around 35% of our students are proficient and advanced. And we only have 1/3 of our students who are below basic, which sounds kind of scary. But if we look at our overall performance on math at Elkins Park for the last year, and remembering that our PSSA, what we focused on was doing our open-ended responses, which is not really sort of measured on the benchmark. We put all our eggs into making sure that we're able to answer those open-ended questions on the PSSA. So I'll be very interested to see what our PSSA math scores look like. One of the things that I'm very, very proud of is how 5th grade and 6th grade is doing at ELA. We're going to go backwards a little bit. 6th grade ELA, on the benchmark, only 5% of the entire school, and remember we have all those 4 elementary schools that come into one, are scoring below basic. That's a big tribute to the work that they're doing in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. Again, that's looking a lot better than we've scored on our ELA and on the PSSA last year. So hopefully that will show as well. And you notice that we've reduced it and moving from 5th grade to 6th grade, the number of students in the whole school that are below basic to only 5%. And I'm very excited about that, meaning that we have well over 20% of our students who receive all kinds of help, whether it maybe possibly could be having an IEP or using some other kind of help that they receive. But that really means a lot to me for what we're able to do in ELA. And the fact that we're about 60% or higher again for advanced and proficient, with 23% of our students scoring advanced in ELA in 6th grade. And that really means a lot to us, because one thing that we're noticing is from 5th grade to 6th grade in ELA, we are showing growth. And from 5th grade to 6th grade and math, we're also showing growth. So we're excited about that. We're maintaining, and hopefully that will continue and the results will show in other standardized tests. Now, remember, on the PSSA test, it will be a little different than the results on the benchmark, because you'll have to answer those open-ended responses and answer those text-dependent analysis. And we put all of our eggs in that basket. So hopefully it will show dividends when those results come back. Some of the causes of our problems my wonderful colleagues have definitely touched upon. We've had students who never took a test inside of a school building since they were in 3rd grade, who are now in 5th grade. We had some students who, were dealing with a whole bunch of anxiety with the pandemic, and Elkins Park got hit hard with a lot of our students coming down with COVID and having to spend some time outside of the classroom. But however, I'm still feeling really good because of those numbers that we're showing in the benchmark and how that looks for ELA, and even the fact that we were able to maintain for the most part in mathematics. We also have a variety of levels. As you notice, when you get in 5th grade, we have more students that might not have had the blessing of having our elementary school experience. It might look a little different for our students in 5th grade. But however, when it comes to ELA, as you can see, that we're able to really keep that high level of above 50% proficient and advanced. Our priorities are to make sure that we utilize the resources of WIN to maximize our experiences, to make sure that we give the students exactly what they need when they need it. We are very intentional of what we do with our team meetings to make sure that we use those team meetings to utilize data to make sure that we grow instruction. We also making sure that we use the real world PSSA as well as real world standards for math and ELA, so that students are never surprised when they see those standards or the type of problems or open-ended questions or text-dependent analysis. One of the things that we're doing now is also making sure that our students are able to write, be very specific with their writing, answer questions, cite evidence, and do those wonderful things that will prepare them for 7th and 8th grade and make them college and career ready as well. We want to continue to make sure that we look at our data and make sure that we look closely at it to make sure that we're providing our teachers with any kind of information to make sure that we improve the overall academic performance. And we continue to analyze a lot of different resources that the district has provided us. I think that you can definitely see it in ELA, the results of the Department of Education for the Cheltenham School District and the Board of Directors, as well as the hard work of the 4 elementary school. I'm starting to see that, especially with the way that students are able to read, that they're coming in on grade level, that they're performing above 60% on all of our standardized tests. And we're seeing the benefits of the work that is being put in 1st and 2nd grade. So that's something that at Elkins Park we see. Sure, we want to make sure that we continue to show growth and that we hand those students over to the high school as well as Mr. Metcalf performing, but I do see that benefit paying off in mathematics. Our desired outcome and things that we need to work on is this year we focused on one thing, making sure that students found a love for mathematics and also making sure that students were not scared of mathematics. We really went around and made sure that our classrooms had the equal amount of things hanging up as far as ELA in 5th grade, as well as mathematics, so that they're exposed to them. We use open-ended problems that it could be fun for students to be able to solve real-world problems with some of the specialists that we had in there. And we wanted to make sure that students looked at math as something not to be scared of, but something to enjoy. And then making sure that students fall in love with it again. There are a lot of fun things with statistics, perhaps sports scores, perhaps taking tallies or making surveys that can show students that math is not something they can be scared of, but that's something they can enjoy. And we are seeing some progress with that. I can't wait to see the PSSA scores to see exactly how we did on the PSSA test that is given out. And also we will continue to do that. Our main goal for Elkins Park is making sure that we use weekly assessments to make sure we reflect to see how students are doing, and use those weekly reflections to drive our instruction so that we can predict how students are going to do, and also provide interventions that may be needed for those students that need extra help. When we go back to ELA, again, I stake my claim on feeling really good about the fact that, and throughout the whole 5th grade, again, you're talking about all of the classes, only 11% of our students score below basic. And again, we were well over 60% that were advanced and proficient. And then we look at 6th grade, and then I was very proud that only 5% of our students were below basic. And again, well over 60% of our students continue to be advanced or proficient. And also the number of advanced students in ELA in 6th grade made me smile with 23%. So we still have a lot of work to go to continue to make sure we maintain. We do need to grow. There's some work that we need to do in mathematics, but I'm very proud of the way that the students are coming to us in 5th grade, and proud of the way that we're sending them to Mr. Metcalf in 6th grade. So our benchmarks tell some of the story, but gives us the data that we need to continue to improve, to make sure that we continue to make students college and career ready as we send them to Mr. Metcalf and on to the high school. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Principal Wallace. And our next presentation on behalf of Cedar Brook Middle School, Principal Metcalf.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I just want to give a huge shout out to all the teachers, in our school district, because, this, even coming back, things still aren't normal, and it's a challenge for everybody. I want to give a special shout out to my teachers and my team. I know everyone's been working hard, but I want to acknowledge the work that I've been seeing every day in my school specifically. So you can go to the next slide, please. So, I think one of the things that we were very happy to see on the first benchmark was that we didn't have any scholars that were below basic. And I'll be honest, it's easy for kids to slip, especially when you haven't scored or when you're not performing below basic. And so I'm happy that we didn't have any scholars, do a backslide. One of the things that I'll point out ahead of time, as you look at every single last one of our slides for every category, all of our children increased in both the advanced and proficient range. So I'll say the overall proficiency. And for every category, for English, math, and science, for every grade, we reduced our below basic and basic. And if you see our basic being higher, it's because we reduced our below basic. So I'm very happy about that data as well. So as you can see here, for advanced, we increased from 8% to 11%, proficiency from 57% to 67%. And clearly you can see that the kids or our scholars that were in our basic range moved over either to proficient or advanced, and the scholars from proficient moved to advanced as well. Next slide. Same thing here. We are actually going to be paying a lot more attention. As a math teacher, I take this personally, actually, because we want to, continue to increase our scores and reduce our below basic even more. But like I said before, we've reduced our below basic. We went from 44% to 27%. So some of those scholars more than likely moved over into our basic range, right? And so for our basic range, we did go up here. I'm sorry, we actually, yes, we went up here as well from 33% to 38%, right? So by reducing our below basic, those scholars moved over into our basic range. And then I think for proficiency, we also increased, went from 19 to 28%. And then for advanced, we went from 3% to 8%. So again, we're continuing to reduce our below basics and increase our number of proficient scholars. Next slide, please. Here for 8th grade ELA, I was very happy to see this. We went from, having 7% below basic to 0. Again, one of our main goals was to reduce all of our below basics, for sure. That's number one thing, because to us, that demonstrates that our scholars aren't even on grade level, and I think it's important, to demonstrate, to actually highlight, the work that our teachers were doing. And I'll talk later about some of the things that we did to kind of focus on that and what we'll be doing differently next year to ensure we can reach more of our scholars. But again, when you're looking here, you see that for our advanced scholars went from 13% advanced to 23% advanced. And then proficiency went from 49% to 57%. And we also reduced our basic here from 31% to 20%. Next slide, please. And again, I don't like seeing the red for math, but again, it's a highlight, the fact that we did reduce our below basic here in math from 51% to 33%. Our basic went from 33% to 30%, and then proficient, we went up from 14 to 27, and again, from 2 to 9 for advanced. And again, with the understanding that our scholars went from, below basic actually into our basic range. And one of the things that we did for our scholars, some of our scholars had 300-point increases on the benchmark, right? And so I think for us, it really just was a testament of, us meeting with our scholars. We didn't have a chance to meet with everybody, but for our scholars who did not perform well, we definitely met with them, to give them the encouragement, to talk about, the importance of the benchmark and why we wanted them to perform the very best. And I think that did solidify and help some of our scholars, understand the importance of it. Next slide, please. And here in science, again, you can see kind of like a pattern of us continuing to reduce our below basic. And in here, we actually also reduced our basic. So we had a lot of scholars move over into our proficient and advanced range, which I'm very proud to see. 27% to 22 for below, 27 to 18 for basic, proficient went from 36 to 42, and advanced from 10 to 17. And like I said, for every one of our grade levels and for every tested group, we reduced our below basic and we increased our proficiency in advanced categories. Next slide, please. All right, so I already kind of went over our salient data just to hit our root causes. So obviously the pandemic had an impact on all of our schools, from teachers being out sick, from our scholars being out sick, the missing instruction. And then when you just think about the year and a half that they missed out on having that face-to-face contact, that, hands-on instruction that's right in front of them, our scholars had to adapt as well as our teachers. I think in addition to that, a lot of the social emotional needs have not been met for our scholars, so I think we're doing a much better job than what we started at my school, and we're going to continue to work on that. But that definitely has had an impact on our scholars. If they're having trauma, kind of happening in their life on a daily basis, and those cell phones are definitely, providing a lot of trauma, and instances within our schools that, it's starting a lot of drama as well. It's having a huge impact on learning. So, we need to make sure that some of our, our trauma that's, that our scholars are experiencing are met appropriately. I would say learning styles and different learning modalities have not been addressed during the pandemic. When they're learning just one way on the internet, and it's synchronous, or if it's an asynchronous class, it kind of provides some challenges for some of our scholars who, might not be mature enough to understand how to cope with that. And I think it was new for everybody. So even teachers, struggled as well. I think the idea of were we able to get through all of our curriculum, right? I think that's always going to be a question. I mean, we may have gotten through it, but to what expense, right? What did we cut out in order to get to the very end? I think calculator skills is an important thing as well. We have to start ensuring that we're teaching our kids how to utilize calculators. A calculator, even at the age and grade level, 7th to 8th grade, is a bridge to learning for a lot of our scholars. And, we still want to teach the basic skills, but when we're on that, doing that test, we can provide a lot of confidence for our scholars by the use of calculators. I think the challenge of learning new complex skills when when the less challenging skills were not mastered, I think that had definitely played a huge part in why some of our scholars did not perform well. And then with regards to science, I think science skills, they're learned over the course of a few years. The last time our scholars took a scholar or science PSSA was in the 4th grade. So, they're trying to capitalize on, a number of different years of learning. And I think, it's important for us to, to keep that in mind when, we're looking at science PSSA scores or our benchmarks. As far as our priorities, so when plays a really important part in our school life. When is for the reinforcement and reteaching of our skills. We also want to make sure that we're using PLC time effectively, using that data to create learning plans for small group pullout. And I would say that has had a huge impact on what we did after the first benchmark. After looking at the data, myself along with my team, we made some changes to how we did WIN. So within our class, within the actual class structure, we broke the class down into like 2 or 3 groups, and the teacher did direct instruction with a small group while the other scholars were working on IXL. And after half of the WIN period, she would rotate the other kids in. And so I think that had a huge impact. In addition to that, as I have here, small group pullout instruction, we actually manipulated and maneuvered our WIN schedule around where I had teachers who were able to pull out on a weekly basis, Monday through Friday, 4 to 7 kids, and work on some targeted instruction to really support them around some of the areas that they weren't performing well in. And initially we worked on, looking at the scholars that were, I would say, our bubble scholars, right? And those would be our scholars who were low proficient, high basic. We really worked on, supporting them with those small group pullout sessions. Meanwhile, our scholars that were performing below basic and, medium to high level proficient and advanced, they were getting the support of the rotating situation that was happening inside of our classrooms. So the small group pullout bubble scholars consisted, as I just repeated that, only 4. So here's some of the complications that we have to fix for next year that we've already fixed within our schedule. We have 6 teams at our school. 3 of them are 7th grade, the other 3 are 8th grade. Only 4 out of our 6 teams were able to really do that small group pullout with a teacher, with the 4 to 7 kids for our WIN classes. So we made some modifications to our schedule for next year to ensure that all of our teams are able to do that by moving around some of our teacher schedules appropriately. And so next year, I'm happy to say that all 6 of our teams will actually have the opportunity for small group pullout. What else? The WIN and academic enrichment for advanced and proficient. So we're also next year going to be implementing an opportunity for our scholars to now get advancement during WIN. And that's not something that happened this year, right? So this year for us, it was either you were doing IXL or you were getting direct instruction in a small group. So we've, made some changes to our scheduling to where, our gifted scholars, still get their opportunities for their gifted classes, but then we can now utilize some of that time from our gifted teachers to support scholars who are in need of enrichment, but not necessarily be labeled as gifted. And then I think our hands-on science experiments, we have to make sure we're continuing to do that. We are making some changes to PBL, but our teachers are still heavily engaged in doing hands-on science experiments, and that gives scholars that, concrete to abstract ideology. And I think that's really important for us to kind of keep in mind. I think other priorities would be making sure we meet our social emotional needs. That's with our counselors and our trauma-informed practices. Mr. Taylor and some of the work he's doing was able to reach out to a couple people. We also had Dr. Ryan Brown Beasley do a session with our teachers, and we're going to continue to work and supporting our teachers around that. And then I think also just to commend the work our teachers and Mr. Taylor have done. Mr. Taylor actually leads our PBIS. We've done an amazing job this year. When I say Brook Bucks are all over the world right now, they really are. And we've been incentivizing our scholars, but also looking at the data to try to ensure that we can, utilize our best practices to support our scholars behaviorally. And I think Jason said it best, our behavioral data and our academic data are hand in hand, right? They're not separated. We want to make sure our scholars have positive learning environments. If you don't have that, it's really difficult to learn. For our desired outcomes, reduce basic and below basic, which we've done. We want to continue to focus on that. Increased advanced and proficient rates. So we're going to continue to work on focus on that by adding the enrichment piece. We want to ensure an academic, safe, and positive school culture and climate. That's why we're going to continue to focus on PBIS. I might have to talk to Jason a little bit about that because I love a competition. So we're going to be working against you guys a little bit. But also, we want to have continuous improvement in scholar growth, right? To me, it's not about the proficiency. I'm more focused on the fact that our scholars made growth and they moved from one area to the other. And I think that's really important because we can even have growth within below basic, right? Someone who scored, 10, points, let's say, now they're scoring 200 points. I think that's a good starting block and something that we want to, still recognize for our scholars. And then again, continue to improve our use of PBIS. And then I just, as a added note, this is just my math mind going in there. I wanted to show like the percent increase. So I thought this was really interesting because again, it's hard to move children, right? And it's hard to move a school. So, I think, I want to say that because I know, that, as administrators, we're very proud of our schools and the work that our children are doing, but this is hard work. It's not easy, focusing on supporting teachers who may be struggling, supporting scholars who may be struggling. And it's not just them struggling with academics, right? It's like teachers are struggling with social emotional needs and support as well, as administrators are too. So just going through here for 7th grade, our percent increase of proficient and advanced. For English, it was 20%, and for math, it was 63.63%. And I'm not talking about actual growth percentage, right? I'm talking about a percent increase, right? A little bit different type of formula. So if I went from 5% of my scholars being proficient to 10%, I actually doubled or had a 100% increase. For 7th grade, our percent decrease for basic and below basic. Again, I think these are really important numbers here. So for English, 41%, and we had no below basic for benchmark 1 or benchmark 2, but we had a 41% decrease in our below basic and basic, which was really basic. For math, we had a 15.58% decrease for below basic and basic. If we move over to the 8th grade side, for ELA, our percent increase of proficient and advanced, ELA was 29%. Our math was 125%. And then our science was 28.26%. And then our decrease in basic and below basic for English, we didn't have any below basic on our benchmark 2, but for basic and below basic combined, we decreased it by 47.36%. Our math, we decreased our basic and below basic by 25%. And then our science, we decreased it by 25.92%. So I really believe some of the things that we implemented after benchmark 1 had a huge impact on, how our scholars perform, but also I think, the teaching of our, within the classroom as well, and the utilization of that block schedule. And I just say, it's important for, as administrators, to make these changes. We really have to sit down. You have to get the trust of your team. And I think, we were able to do that and kind of get on the same page to, make some changes and shifts after benchmark 1. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metcalf. And our last and final school for this evening, Cheltenham High School. And thank you to Ms. Zubeiru, one of the assistant principals at the high school, who agreed to step up and represent the team in light of us having an interim principal who was not present for the fall benchmark.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I'm proud to be here to represent the team at the high school. Before we get started on high school data, I just want to frame it a little bit because it is going to look different than our K-8 data because the schedule at the high school was changed. We went from a traditional 7 to 8 period structure of a day to a 4 period of a day block scheduling. And so because we've moved to block scheduling, you will see our data in semesters. So you will see a semester 1 data and a semester 2 data. We did 2 benchmark administrations for each semester. So you will see the semester 1 data first and the semester 2 data next. So if we would go to the next slide, we'll start with and the other thing I should note is that our data is going to be different because where you see grade level data from K-8, you will see keystone data, which are the end of course exams for biology, literature in 10th grade, and algebra 1. So we test benchmarking in those courses as opposed to a grade like our K-8 partners. So these are our English scores. English, we tested our 9th and our 10th graders. And if you take a look at that, our data is pretty static in semester 1 from the fall administration to the winter administration. The fall administration was the very end of September, and the winter was in the middle of December. Next slide, please. Our Algebra 1 data, if you will notice, we have some improved scores. There's we reduced the below basic numbers of kids in the below basic range in the winter administration. And so that was something that was a positive point of data there. The benchmarks for algebra were given in October for first semester, and then in December on the 20th and the 21st, which notably we had a rather large COVID kind of outbreak in late December. So it happened right after the kids took this benchmark. So I'm pleased with that data. Next slide, please. This is our biology data. You will see that the data remains somewhat static again, fall administration and winter administration for semester 1. And now we'll move into semester 2. Benchmark administration for ELA happened in February, February 14th and 15th, and then again in April, the 20th and the 21st. And so you will see the semester 2, we had some more test takers. So when you look at this data, there are more people in semester 2 who took the test than did in semester 1, and the scores were improved. This is biology. Biology, the data remained somewhat static for semester 2. They took it in February and April again, and the scores are relatively static. Next slide, please. All right, so let's take a really quick look at the root causes. And much like my colleagues in the other buildings have said, we definitely had the same kind of struggles with social emotional learning and resources that we needed in order to provide what everyone needed, both staff and scholars. The first root cause is that we have started with this new block schedule, we've been able to implement PLCs, but they're just beginning. And so our professional learning communities meet once every 6-day cycle for about 40 minutes. And that provides us with space to talk about the data and to guide future instructional decisions, but that's not been fully in place just because of the year that we've had. Intervention time for the first semester, we didn't use it as fully as what it could be used. We made some adjustments for second semester so that it was more effective, but we're very hopeful for next year to have the second year. We've made some mistakes and we're ready to improve them. The other thing that has been a common thread through all of the principals has been our class coverages. So we've been hit hard with some of our teacher coverages. In fact, in biology and in Algebra 1, we have 2 very key teachers who've been out on long-term leave. And so that puts pressure not just on the scholars in those classes, but also on the teachers who are covering those classes, who then don't have the time to plan or prepare for their own classes in the day. So that's been something that's been very stressful, and it's a theme across all of our schools. And there were several COVID closures. The high school went through a time where from January 3rd until the 18th, I believe, we were on optional remote instruction. And so that definitely had an impact on our scholars' learnings. The school priorities for us moving forward, the name of our game is going to be continuous improvement, just trying to kind of take a look at what we've done and what we want to improve. So our school priorities are to target specific scholar needs and address them during intervention periods more effectively. Provide scholars and families with online remediation supports prior to test administration, the test administration windows and throughout the year. And so moving to a block schedule, what we found is that if you took biology in first semester, the actual Keystone test administration could be in January, and then there could be another one in May. So it could be one of those things where we're going to need to remediate all year long, as opposed to just looking at particular semesters. So we need to really take a look at how we provide remediation and make that targeted. We need to utilize data protocols to help our scholars, administrators, and teachers track and take ownership of the data. We need to hold class meetings to address growth. I think we're going to steal Mr. Lytle's growth breakfast idea. And we will kind of take a look at holding class meetings to celebrate growth on tests and these benchmarks. I think that's really an important piece. We also need to utilize our PBIS incentives to increase scholar motivation and preparation on the benchmark and the Keystone exams. We definitely need to capitalize on our PBS teams. I have seen in my own house how important those Brook books have become that Mr. Metcalf talked about. And so we need to come up with an age-appropriate type of incentive at the high school level. And so we're excited to take a look into that. And our desired outcomes, the administration and teaching staff, we need to communicate and highlight the importance of showing growth on benchmarks to both our families and scholars. We have not done as solid as a job as I think any of us want to with respect to communicating with families and scholars. Scholars need to attend intervention in a targeted, meaningful way. We have the time, we have the resources in place. We just need to make sure that everybody understands, staff, scholars, and families, the importance of those structures to academic growth. We need to ensure that our families feel more connected to what their scholars learn and their progress. What we're grading needs to be as meaningful as what they're being tested on. We need to make sure that we have a growth mindset about that. And we need to make sure that we have improved scholar performance on the Keystone exams. When we see those results come back, we need to make sure that there's improvement, and we hope to do that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Zubeiru. Next slide, please. And now I'll turn things back over to Ms. Mulhorn.
Great, thank you, Dr. Smith. And thank you to everyone, to all of our principals and vice principals for all of that data. I know that it was a lot of time and effort to pull everything together to present to us tonight, and we really do appreciate it. I also want to thank Dr. Smith for pointing out why we are meeting on a Wednesday night this week instead of our normal Tuesday. I neglected to say that, so thank you. I also want to note that Ms. Lohman is having some computer difficulties, unfortunately, and has had to leave the meeting, but she will follow up with her questions when she is able, I'm sure. With that, if any school board directors have any questions, if you could raise your hand, that would be great. Ms. Henry.
Hi, and again, thank you to all the principals who, for the amount of work and effort I know it was to, put this data together. And I also want to acknowledge, I can't even imagine what it took for you all to get through this year, because, while schools were open, we were still dealing with all of the conditions and the challenges of the pandemic, which continue to have an impact on our scholars. And so, I'm hoping and looking forward to, what plans are being put in place for next year to continue to move. And as you all so eloquently pointed out and appropriately pointed out, that seeing growth is a really great thing. And that's what we're looking for, because that's how you get to that space. It's not just about a number, it's about the growth and how students are beginning to progress. I have a couple of questions. One of them, and this is for my own understanding, what are the definitions and how do you differentiate between the basic and the proficient? Because my understanding as I'm looking at that data is basic is not where you want people to be, our students to be. Pretty much want them to be at that proficient. But how is that defined in that data?
So, Ms. Henry, you have, or Madam Chair, you have cut scores, which determine whether or not students are demonstrating mastery at a proficient level, which means they're meeting standard. If they're not meeting standard, they're at the basic level. And then you have those that potentially are below basic, which means they're even farther away from the target.
Okay.
Your advanced students on the other end are those students who are truly excelling and exceeding meeting the standard target.
Okay. And the next, it's sort of a question, but not a question that I expected to be answered tonight. It's more of a thought that I had. And looking at the, consistently across the district, that it appeared that our first graders were struggling and may be struggling more so as a collective group than other, cohorts or other grades across the district. Are we finding, and I don't know, Dr. Scriven, if you or Dr. Smith are aware of this, is that consistent with what other districts are experiencing too? And so, like I said, you don't have to answer that if you don't have it, but that was just a thought I had.
Yeah, no, I'll circle back. I do not know, comparatively speaking, whether that's a common thread across other districts or not, but it's something I can definitely find out with respect to our immediate area.
And I would add that other districts, it would be difficult to compare because other districts don't publicly share their benchmark information. It stays within the school. So if we wanted to make comparisons, we would have to wait until the summative data is released.
Right, right. All right, thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Mr. Burdell Williams.
Yep. Thank you to all the administrators for the very detailed presentations, and again, all the teachers who are working hard along with the administrators to ensure the best possible educational outcomes for our students. I just have actually one clarifying question in regards to the assessments themselves. So I know we showed data from 2 different assessment points from this year. And my question is about how, like, is there taking into account the expected growth of a particular scholar? And this may have been alluded to at another point in the meeting, but I'm not sure if I missed it or not. But I write, it's not the same. Are we testing on the same information or the same, I guess, subject matter? It's not even subject matter. It's the same concepts for both exams. Are they like identical? Is it the same exam?
No.
Understanding.
No.
It's the same content, but the standards are different because you're looking at a different snapshot of time as schools are moving through the scope and sequence of the curriculum. And that's what Dr. Smith alluded to in her introductory, that you're not comparing apples to apples in what was just shared with you tonight.
Got it. I thought so, and that's what I was kind of I just wanted a little additional clarity around that, right? That's perfect, right? I did want to understand, right, how, I think that's an important factor. I guess it does provide a lot more real-time data for the teachers themselves to understand, how a student has progressed, given the exposure to their, their ability to like efficiently provide instruction throughout that time period between point A and point B, like from a personal, perspective. But I did want to just kind of clarify that. So I appreciate that.
And I want to afford Dr. Smith, I think I cut her off. I just wanted to afford her an opportunity to expound upon that question as well. So Doc, I'm gonna stay off and I'll let you field the question.
Nope, I'm fine. And the question was answered. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, just wanted to check, and my apologies on that. Thank you. Did you have another one, Mr. Burdell Williams?
That was all. Just wanted to clarify there. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I might have another one, but I'm gonna hold on to it for a sec.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you. I just wanted to, I had to speak up to thank everybody as well for this presentation. A lot of data. It is not lost on me, Dr. Smith, that we are probably an outlier in presenting this level of granularity as a district. But it is appreciated just for no other reason that it gives a sense, or it helps me understand the work you all do, and the kind of granular focus you have on analytics, even if it is, not something that we would normally be exposed to. That y'all are looking very closely behind the scenes, and even more data than than this 80 slide presentation. So just thank you for allowing us to see that. And also there are a lot of, whenever I see a line that was once in this way going in the positive direction, I understand that there's so much work that went into that. Is this level of data, like in working with, do teachers see this level of data focused, honed in on their own classrooms? Is a question I have. And
the answer to that is yes.
Okay, so that's yeah. I could imagine that being hopefully very compelling, just because it's a number they can see. So thank you. Also, I wouldn't be living up to my reputation if I didn't ask one tiny question around. I noticed one. I swear I wasn't looking. I just happened to notice that the English fall numbers in the high school seem to be missing some percentages. So insofar as this is going to be a public document, it might be worth tweaking that one slide, page 63. So thank you again. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Epps?
Thank you. Good evening again, everyone. I certainly second and third the appreciation for the presentation tonight from all of the principals. I had little tidbits from each of you that I won't go through right now, but I will say certainly looking forward at some point to seeing one of those kindergarten classes at Glenside and asking them about subsidizing, I believe is what you mentioned. But I sure appreciate the common theme of how to use the data to understand what skills are needed to meet the standards, and how do you and really focusing instruction on meeting those skills. And so it took me as well to, as I heard all the principals talk about different types of resources that could help, different types of staffing that could help, right? But different things that would help meet some of the school priorities. I thought about how we are making budget decisions at this same time of year. And so as we have, this really is a question to answer right now, but as we have some of those conversations, it'd be great to start to talk more about what do the investments look like in children and schools. And so, for example, I saw like the resources that were needed. What does that look like at that budget level? And how, as we make some of those decisions, it would be good to include some of that more in our conversations. And so I'll leave it at that. And again, second, the encouragement about the growth. I appreciate Principal Wallace, how you framed it, that you can look to the elementary schools for some hope. You then look to Cedar Brook for some hope, and that definitely was felt throughout the presentations tonight as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fishbein?
Thank you. I want to emphasize something that Michelle Robinson said and see if there's any salience in the rest of the room about having one classroom with 16 students doing so well and showing such growth. One classroom, 16 students showing that kind of growth. I think I've got the number right. The idea that we have one teacher having that kind of success in a population that includes students with IEPs suggests to me that that person has found something in her pedagogy or his pedagogy that we might be able to utilize elsewhere in the district. And that's something that I've always thought in my years of service, that we should be able to find these master teachers and have them help us make everyone a master teacher. And I just wanted to call that out, to congratulate that teacher and her principal, or his principal, for those kinds of outcomes, and to also emphasize that what we've gotten tonight is a bunch of averages, but there are data points within those averages that should give us more encouragement than the averages, and that we should work on and build upon. Thank you.
Thank you. The only little question I have lots of comments that I'd love to make, because I was taking furious notes. And I do want to echo Ms. Zubeiru that the Brook Bucks are also a hot commodity in this house, and they no longer fit in the phone case. She has to store them somewhere else, and it's a major problem for a 7th grader. But Ms. Robinson, you talked about it first, I think, and I know Mr. Lytle did as well, but number sense, and you talked about a specific training the teachers went to. I don't know if that's being done at all the K-4 schools or just Myers and Glenside. And I don't know if I'm just not a math person, but like just a 10-second overview of what that means. If someone could help me with that, that would be great.
So last summer, Penn offered a elementary math institute, and the core of the content was around building number sense routines into your classroom. So if you think about Envision, they sort of start with a solve and share. And so we kind of substitute or enhance that part of the lesson that they start with to really have students look at numbers, look at real world use of groups of numbers, and make sense of what they see, and just kind of record their, oh, I see 2 groups of 10, or and just think about math in sort of their real world. So you may have a carton of eggs, and how are you looking at these numbers? How do you count and just know off the top of your head? And so students would sort of report out what they see, and they would be very different. So we sort of talked about how we can all look at the same thing, but get different numbers. And then having students take the time to explain their thinking is the part that really transferred, that skill sort of transferred into their math work and their conceptual understanding of that math work. And so if you talk to that particular teacher, she'll tell you it was the best PD she's ever had in her whole life. And she I shared her, obviously redacting the information, but shared the success that she had with my instructor at Penn, who led the PD. And she was just so excited. They want to meet each other. It's going to be, exciting. But having students, it took a while for it to sort of to have traction in the school. But when we did the second training with the staff to sort of make it stick, everyone started to do it as a part of their natural routine. And what they found is that students all across the building, in terms of feedback, they are in love with math, which is like part of the battle. And so they're like, we don't want to do Envisions. We want to keep, doing these number routines. But to see the way that applied, their understanding applied in the benchmarks was really amazing. And this particular teacher, she loved what she learned so much that she started day one, first day of school. She started with the number sense routines, and that's the result. And we see similar gains in teachers as they started to that kindergarten teacher, room 7, go to that room. You should see the way that the kindergartners are talking about math. It's absolutely amazing. So it is definitely something. I'm going to find out if they're doing another one this summer, but it's definitely something that we should, probably consider in terms of how we help students grow in math, not just, performance, but just their love for math and seeing themselves as mathematicians.
And I think just to echo on that without repeating, number sense routines for me and the way I see them are just an opportunity for students to engage in math in a less evaluative manner. And if you could think of starting off a math lesson with an estimation, what made you think that? Or with a splatter plot where you see a certain image, and it's a discussion around math that has no right or wrong answer, where you're giving the students an opportunity to share their thought process as to how they came about to that answer. When we talk about learning, we talk about conceptual frameworks, we talk about preconceived knowledge, and we talk about thinking or metacognition. Number sense routines are an option or one of the ways in which we give students an opportunity, regardless of the standards and those type of things, to just think out loud and share their conceptual framework about math. And with there being no wrong or correct answer, students are able to hear other students thinking, to see other students thinking, and teachers are able to capture that in a way that is not necessarily evaluative, and you don't have to be proficient or below basic in order to access that content. So the incorporating of an opportunity for students to talk about the why of math is what breeds that love that Ms. Robinson was talking about as it relates to sharing your thinking and being allowed or able to just share why you thought what you thought, and using real life examples in order to engage students in such discussion.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Glidewell, and thank you, Mrs. Robinson. I appreciate that. I'll just add that I think I really, I love seeing the common themes throughout everyone's presentations, where the things that, that we, I think, kind of speak to who we are as a district and what we're focusing on. I really enjoyed hearing that. And I hope that, easier said than done, I know, but when all of you principals have the time to, I hope that, maybe learning number sense can come to another school, or just, I know that you're all doing amazing things in your buildings and all doing, working your butts off, getting it all done. But I know there's also ways that we can all learn from each other. And so I hope that, we continue to be able to do that so that we can make all of our schools, the best that they can be. Mr. Lytle?
Yeah, I would just like to stress on my end that number sense is just one example of the goal of teaching kids to think about the why of math. Number sense is one tool, but the why of math is, if you think about why do you regroup? We know we carry the one and we put it over top of the next column, but why? What does that equal? That's the goal of number sense, to get kids to think about the why and not just the procedure. So I know that we like to sometimes talk about packaging with certain programs, but the concept and the idea and the thinking behind the thinking is the gold that is in that number sense routine.
Absolutely.
I think I would just add to that, teaching teachers how to do that is really important. And so establishing that as routines in their classroom, I think, is what has had such an impact on the student learning and growth.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll just note that that was a pull-out example. It doesn't have to be number sense. It was just an example. I will go, and do any other board members have any questions? I'll go to the public to see if anyone has a hand raised. If you do, please raise your hand and let us know where you live in the district. I am not seeing, oh, I do. Oh, no, it's Mr. Burdell Williams. So go ahead.
Not a community member.
No, that's okay. I was looking at the wrong list.
A community member who's also a board member.
Yes, go for it.
So, yeah, so one of the, now that we've heard very eloquently from both Ms. Robinson and Principal Lytle, about, this, the specific technique, right? It also highlighted for me what I heard very much so in our K-4 presentations, which was the need for common assessments and commonality. And to me, that type of replication of that type of energy is exactly the type of commonality that we want. But what I heard though sounded more around common assessment as it was related to curriculum development. And I know that we've been on this journey for at least the last 5 years of taking some pretty significant steps in developing curriculum. And so my question is just, it's pretty direct, right? Is that common assessment a part of curriculum development, and are we looking for that? Is that something that we have as a targeted aspect of our maybe next stage of curriculum development?
So it's not necessary a part of curriculum development. The curriculum development, what comes with that is your pacing guides, which should be aligned. So yes, from that perspective, the team is working on a common protocol around data and how to make data-informed decisions through the PLC process, and then making sure that there's a systemic school improvement or continuous improvement protocol that's being followed, and trying to just make sure that there's alignment in terms of curriculum and whatever assessment we use, whether it's a summative or a formative. So these are all things that will be happening, and information that we're really gathering right now from all stakeholders through the strategic planning process. So, and just note that question and other questions to see where they surface in terms of priorities and goals that potentially will be reflected in our plan.
Okay, got it. So I did thank you for that. Because I just wanted to understand what that meant, right? Because I do know it worked very hard and invested lots of resources in the developing curriculum, which we know was very much so needed. And so I just really
we need a whole nother ED affairs presentation to address that, Mr. Burdell Williams.
No, I completely understand. So that was kind of where I was going with it, because I do want to hear more about that. I'm sure we will, but I know this school year is coming to a close. But I just want to just share, just as one board member, that I still haven't, kind of taken my eye off of it. And I know we've done a lot. So just hearing that just reminded me of the fact that, we are on a journey, and it is a continuum from point A, where we were in time, to where we will be when we have the perfect, set of curriculum standards from, K all the way up through 12. I know our expectations there, vary a little bit, but, hearing about that and understanding more about that at the board level, I mean, even for the community level, is something that I think is also important to couple with the granularity of the data that we just heard tonight.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Burdell Williams. I do not see any hands in the attendees, in the public, or in the room. This is your final chance here. If not, thank you again to Dr. Smith, to Dr. Riley for working on the presentation, to all 7+ principals and vice principals. Thank you. I know this was a large task, and again, not a task that other principals are being tasked with. This was something, that we asked for specifically. So again, thank you for that. And Mrs. Robinson.
I just wanted to say thank you to Jessica Keene for her active work on getting some support around counseling in the schools. That Aldersgate and the Child and Family Focus has been tremendous. And even though there's some limitations with that, we fully utilize that team, and it's really made a difference in some of the needs, the social emotional needs that we've had with scholars, both individually and as a group.
Thank you. I think that I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. So I think that it seems that the administration and the board members are in agreement. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. If there are no other questions, though, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Do I have a second?
Second. Williams, so I don't ask any more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burdell Williams. And thank you to everyone. Everyone have a great night.